Hi everyone, welcome to Tech Insights Day. Today we'll start off with Mustafa Kurtuldu from Meta. I hope you enjoy the session.
First is a sound check. Oh, you can hear me. Hello. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? I hear nothing. Yes, no? Say that again. Hello, Julia. Okay. Hello. So my name is Mustafa. I'm a staff product designer here, at Meta. I've been in the industry about 24 years. Before that, I was at Twitter, 3.5. Then Elon came along. I won't talk about that. Not on camera. And then before that, I was at Google for about 6 years, working on Chrome. What I'd like to talk to you about today is hacking user perception and how we can make slow systems feel fast and vice versa. So I'm going to tell 4 stories, which are like from a conceptual level about user perception. Then I'm going to cover a bit of research, and then I'll go into like some physical examples of things that we can do to make our systems feel faster. And so the first story I'd like to talk to you about is a story of McDonald's and their milkshakes, and what I like to call user-fudged experiences. And so McDonald's wanted to increase the sale of their milkshakes, and they assumed that by doing what they could do is if they change the flavor, they'll have more sales. And so one technique that companies use is something called focus groups. Are you all familiar with focus groups? Yep, cool. Now, focus groups are really risky because you abandon your responsibilities as a company when you go up to customers and say, give me guidance. It's very risky, especially when you think, okay, if we improve the recipe, this will make more sales. And so if you go to a customer and say, tell me what you want, oftentimes it's this. You know, a pizza with chocolate and pineapple and everything else. Not very useful. But McDonald's listened to their customers and sales didn't really improve. You know, they made it sweeter, fluffier, etc. And so what they did was then they hired a consultant called Clay Christensen. And so the method that they used there is for 18 hours a day, they watched people buying milkshakes at McDonald's. They looked at how long it took, were they outside, so were they by themselves, what they actually did, was it the only thing that they bought, etc. And what they found was 50% of milkshakes were bought before 8:30 in the morning. Now that's weird. Like when you think of a milkshake, it's like summertime, after food, with friends. But interestingly, it was the only thing people bought. They were alone, they bought the milkshake, and then they left by themselves. So what's going on? So the next day they went back, and this time they waited outside the McDonald's to catch people as they came out. And Clay said, when they'd catch them, were like, you know, I'm having a real problem with this behavior. Like, what are you doing at this time in the morning buying milkshakes? People couldn't really explain it, like they were shy, sheepish. And so he would reframe the question. Like this, there's a concept of a process called jobs to be done. The idea is that people will hire products or services to do a thing, to fulfill a job or a need. And he says, okay, remember the last time you had to hire something apart from a milkshake? What did you hire to do this job? And so people start thinking, well, one time I hired a banana, but it was over really quickly. So one time I hired a bagel, but when you're trying to drive, the bagel's really dry, you put cream cheese, it's really difficult, so it's awkward. Another time I hired a chocolate bar, but I felt really guilty. What people were trying to do is create a slow-consuming breakfast that will keep them occupied on their commute. What they needed was something that took some time, keep them occupied, and would keep them full by lunchtime. And so it wasn't the recipe that would make people buy milkshakes. It was people were hiring this for a breakfast. Now, I know that's not in Portugal, a milkshake for breakfast, that seems insane. But this is what people were hiring. And so what McDonald's did was they moved the milkshake machines to the front. That's why most milkshake machines, if they're working, they're never working. I did a video of this on TikTok and people started screaming at me like, they never work. I said, I don't work for McDonald's, man. What's wrong with you? But they moved them to the front of the store. They made prepaid cards to get people in and out as quickly as possible, and they made them thicker, and they increased sales by 7x. So the first step is understand what your users are trying to do, you know, and it's oftentimes not what you think they are. The next story is a story of Houston Airport, occupied time versus unoccupied time. And so, no pun intended, but Houston had a problem. I did intend that pun. And so the time you get on a plane, you get off, and you go into the terminal building, and the bags will take forever to get here, and people are complaining about how long it took. And so Houston spent millions optimizing this process. They got it down to like 7 minutes. They hired new people, new processes, new tech. And 7 minutes is pretty fast from plane to terminal. But then what happened? People were still complaining. What they realized was it's not the time. Like when you're optimizing a system, there comes a point where you can't do it anymore without making the experience really bad. And so it's not the time, but it's the waiting for the bags is annoying. And so what Houston noticed is the planes, when they landed, they would park right next to the terminal building. So they thought, if we park them further away and make people walk, what would happen? Complaints dropped to 0. And so if you think about it, 7 minutes of time, 2 minutes of walking, 5 minutes of waiting. Oh my God, these bags are taking forever. But 5 minutes of walking and 2 minutes of waiting. Oh my God, it's amazing. This is super unethical, I will say. But human beings have sometimes an expectation for things to be fast. I mean, being fast isn't always good, but we know when in the modern world, when you ask people, what's the most stressful thing? Oftentimes air travel is the one at the top. And people's state of mind will change depending on how stressed they feel. The next story is a story of legacy systems. And so building managers always have a problem, like people say the elevator's too slow. And so how do you fix this problem? Like you could install new elevators, upgrade the motors, create new algorithms. But the problem is when you take out one elevator, now you have one less, more complaints. So how do you reframe this? Again, it's not so much that the elevator is too slow, it's like the waiting for an elevator is annoying. And so how do you make it faster? Well, you distract them. So building managers, they'll put up mirrors, play music, and install a hand sanitizer, and suddenly it feels really fast. And so if that works, you know that it's not the system, it's the expectation of the people and their perception. And so a lot of legacy systems like banks have this problem. You can't just rip out the old code and put new stuff in because there's a lot of dependencies. So sometimes you have to do these like distraction techniques. Is it really the system or is it the expectation of the person? The last story before we go into the rest of the talk is a story of complexity. Now this is really, really hard, and it's a story of search. We have a choice whether we pass on the complexity to the user or we solve the complexity for the user. And so way back when, finding stuff on the web was really, really difficult. Like, we couldn't figure out what a good search result was. So what you would have is, we don't know what you're looking for, but here's everything. You find it for yourself. And so that's passing on the complexity. And so when we're designing stuff, throwing UI is the first thing we do. Like, there's an option. And in Silicon Valley, it's very common for add more features, it's more value, add more features. And that's not always the case. And so you had like input fields, categorized links, featured widgets. But finding stuff on the web is hard, but the real thing is finding the wrong content is annoying. And so the founders of Google, they thought, okay, how do you determine what good content is? Now they were studying academics, and in science and academia, typically speaking, generally, not always, a good science paper has more citations. The more citations, the better quality, generally speaking. I mean, there are exceptions, like the most cited paper in the world is like because it's bad science, but generally speaking, more citations is good. And so if you interpret that on the web, the more links a page has, the better it is. And that became the basis of the PageRank algorithm. And so once you have a good classification system, all you need is 3 bits of UI, a search input, and 2 buttons, and the rest is history. And this was really revolutionary when you look at search engines work back in the day. And so instead of passing on the complexity, getting the user to figure something out, you solve the complexity for them. Now, let's just check the time. Cool. You have this chart, slow, low friction, slow, high friction, fast, high friction, fast, low friction. Generally, all the stories will start here. This is where you don't want to be, something that's slow and there's nothing distracting the user. But then as you go through it, you have most companies will get here, distraction techniques, then the optimal place is where you're fast, but you still have to put these friction points because you can't be super fast, otherwise you create a detrimental experience. And this is the best place to be, but it's very hard technically. Like the reason why Google search can do it is because they're using text links and not images. But generally speaking, this is where you end up. But one thing to think about is speed is broken down into 2 parts, the real and the perceived. And so we're going to talk about the perceived, but technical speed is really, really critical, and how you actually solve it. So we have like the Financial Times in the UK, which is a financial newspaper that's subscription-based. Sorry, I couldn't speak for a second. And they can't target every single user because it's expensive. And so they have this algorithm called the tipping point. And so if a user comes to the website 5 times a month, reads 5 articles a month, generally they're an active user. But if they can push them to 9 articles a month, then they're more likely to subscribe. And so they target those users who start reading more and more. But what they found is by making the website 1 second faster, they increased engagement for everyone. So being technically fast is really important. And likewise, when I was at Google, they did a study where they found 51% of users stated that they wouldn't complete a purchase on a slow site. So being technically fast is really, really critical. But one thing to note is user behavior is affected by many different things. And so we've spoken about occupied time. Intention is like people at different states will determine whether they actually do something. Like 30% of users have no intention to do anything on a website. They're just window shopping. Another 30% may want to do something, but in the future. And I think 29% will actually do something then and there. And it changes depending on vertical. So the intent is very different. State of mind, state of body. If a person's standing up and stressed, everything feels slow. But if they're sat down at home, everything feels fast. Maybe this to do with adrenaline. So state of body and mind really affects. Importance is a weird one. When we do studies on speed, what you find is there'll be a group of users, no matter how you make the site or system slower, they will still engage with it. And you think, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just switch off? Usually it's about importance. Like if you're in a foreign country and you're trying to get the maps to load, you're going to wait because you have no choice. If you're in a government system or service, it's your tax returns. You can't just say, no, I'm not going to use this. But what happens is if it's an important service and you find an alternative, you're going to abandon the old one. So you know that there will be, sometimes with big companies like, well, our users are still using it, but they don't realize that the moment there's an opportunity to jump, they will do. So it's important to know that importance is a factor of user behavior. And so we have like the UX speed of hierarchy. When you ask users what's the most important thing for them, they say how long it takes for the page to load. The next 3, how easy to find something, if something fits on my screen, or how simple it's to use, that's all perceptive speed, how they're able to process it. The one at the bottom, how attractive my site looks, is depressing for a designer because it's like, I spent my life making things attractive. But it's important to note as well that brand recognizability is really critical. Like if a user doesn't realize that your site is different to everyone else, trust will deteriorate. But if you ask them, the most important thing is speed. So being technically fast is really key. How many people in here are designers? Raise hands. What, none of you? Engineers. Yay, engineers. I love you all, I'm not one, but yeah. Project managers or others? There you go, okay. Cool. So it's a bit sad because you're all engineers. You all know all this stuff. But anyways, let's pretend that you're not. So the average page content, 50% of the content is going to be images. So what's one thing you can do? Now, if you're working with designers or project managers, send them this. This was a tool that me and my friends at Google designed. It's called Squoosh. Has anyone seen this before? Cool. You know image opt-in though, right? Okay. If you don't, here we're going to have some fun. Okay, so this is a progressive web app. You all know what progressive web apps are, PWAs? Cool. I see some shaking heads. This is a free tool to use. You can drag and drop an image, but we'll use the example one here. And so on the left, what you see is this is the original image, it's 2.79 megabytes. And on the right, you can choose the codec and change the quality. So if I decrease the quality, you can see we save 80%. If I zoom in and drag the image around, you can see the difference between the quality. Now, obviously, the user's not going to drag in this much, but one image, you're saving 80% of bandwidth. That's really, really powerful. And so oftentimes, just making small optimization in terms of imagery will increase your technical speed quite drastically. Now, I believe Squoosh has something you can use in the command line for the engineers, so you can do this automatically. Image opting is like a more graphical user interface where you can drag in images collectively. But there are other tools as well. But just optimizing images is one small thing that, if you do that, your sites will be technically faster. Let's go back into the talk. And so like at Chrome Dev Summit 2018, is that me? Cool. That is me. It's going against my beard. Sorry about that. So Chrome Dev Summit 2018, we took Google I/O's conference website and we reduced the images by 83%. So even Google themselves, their marketing sites, are doing a bad job. So everyone can actually do this to make their sites and systems feel faster. Cool. But speed matters, but the perception of speed is just as important. Because remember, occupied time versus unoccupied time. You can optimize, but there's a point where you can't do any more without damaging the experience. Like the suitcase, you can throw them to get them faster, but people might not be happy with that. Because we find like with technically fast sites, that's like sites which load within 4 seconds, a third of users still have problems with perceiving them to be technically slow. So what can we do to make them faster? So the first thing is the perception. And so now we're going to get really theoretical in design, like, the matrix of design. When a person meets an object for the first time, there's usually 3 steps: affordance, instruction, and feedback. Affordance is when someone recognizes that there's something with the human body that can be engaged with an object. So if it's small, you can pick it up. If it's the shape of the body, you can walk through it or wear it. That's the affordance. That's telling you that you can engage with an object. The instruction, which Don Norman, a famous designer, calls a signifier, is it tells you how to use the object. So if it's a panel, a button, a label, or a shape that fits with the human body, that's the instruction. Feedback is once you do something, it tells you that something's been done, it's okay, we can move on to the next stage. And so physical examples, the mouse, size of the human hand, that's the affordance. The button and the orientation of the button, that's the instruction telling you how to click it. And the feedback, the sound, the light, that's telling you that, okay, the system's taken your action and now it's doing something. Elevator panels. The affordance is that they're usually eye level or like hand level, so it's telling you how to orientate your body to it. The instruction is obviously the floor number, and then the feedback is the light or sound. Now sometimes the instruction and the affordance is like combined, so door handles or the shape of a cup. Like this can be like part of the instruction. So don't get too dogmatic, but when you're designing UI, to think about these 2 different things, or all 3 things together, and how you can actually tell a user and they can interpret what you're trying to actually get them to do. Now, this is a bit of a funny one. Back in the day when Google was trying to create the best standard practice for onboarding credit cards, like when you install Uber for the first time, you have to put your credit card in. So they're trying to teach like app makers how to do it. And so they had this instruction: hold the credit card here to scan. Do you know what people did? They put the credit card on the phone. Sometimes what's obvious is not obvious, and this is why user testing is so important, because when you're in the lab, you are the experts. But then you put that in front of someone, they will, why wouldn't they do that? Because that's what you've told them. It's not just Google, though. This is someone trying to onboard an Apple Watch. Hold the watch here. And it's like, nope, doesn't work like that. So let's try it like this. And then they have to be told, no, you have to lift the phone and scan it like that. So designing recognizable UI or making it obvious is not always obvious. This is why you have to watch people doing things. And so now that we're going really like meta, no pun intended, design is all about designing contrast. Like the arts is all about designing contrast. The reason why one piece of text is legible and another piece isn't is because of one's just a wall and the other, the title is bigger, bolder, the subtitles italicized, slightly smaller, the introductory paragraph is bold but smaller, and then the actual rest of the text is lighter. There's like a melody that you're teaching people. This is the order in which you read. A pull-out quote might get someone's attention, but it's not critical to the rest of it. In music, the absence of sound highlights the sound. And so design is all, and the arts, generally speaking, you'll see, it's all about design and contrast. So if you want someone to click on something, make everything tone back and make it really obvious that that's the thing you want them to click or tap on. And so we have like the Gestalt principles, which they try to explain why the human mind groups things or understands grouping. So this is the law of proximity. And so we see these stars, right? They're just stars, but we perceive them as a square of stars. Or maybe when we move back further, we just see a square, and these are rectangles. We make these associations because the contrast here is much less than here. So we see these groupings. And with UI design, you see like things which are related to one another are grouped much more closer versus not. And so we make this assumption that, okay, this is one collection of items. So when you're designing things, bring things which are related to each other closer. Then we have common fate. When you see a body of things moving, we see one whole group. So with a flock of birds. Like with motion design, you move things together which are related together and move things away which are related together. because people will make the assumption that this is part of one family. And let us get even more scientific. How does the human eye work? And so the human brain, we have these things called the amygdala. These are like small walnuts which trigger our fight or flight mechanism. Because way back when on the savannah, our ancestors who are really sensitive, like their periphery, they survived because they'll see a predator and then they run away. Now, we don't have that problem anymore, but we still respond to fear and motion. Because, there we go. And so the University of Toronto did a study where they found that objects which animated were responded to more quickly than ones that weren't. So motion is really powerful in design. But what that means is motion is intentional. It should be intentional when we're designing it. And so too much motion is a lack of focus. You see it on the mobile web, things will pop, click, move around, the shape will change. It becomes very distracting. We can't focus our eye because our amygdalas are being stimulated. But too little motion causes something called change blindness. Can anyone see what's happening with the image? There's a glitch. Something's changing in the image every so often. Anyone? The engines. Now this is a loop, so you will see it. But if something is loading on the web, it's very quick, you won't. One example of that is when Google were designing their flight comparison site, a user will tap here, and then things were added here. Because it was so quick, they would untap it and tap it again, untap it, tap it again. And so what they did was they created this really exaggerated motion to say, here you go, it's saved. So this is like a feedback mechanism. So we say don't distract people with motion, but this is a good place to do that, to reassure the user that something's happened. Intentional motion. Hey. Sorry, I always do that to throw the photographer off. It's cool. A round of applause for my friend. Sorry about that, man. Right, where were we? Tech talk. Okay, that's where we are. Then we have what we call the pendulum of recognizability. When we're designing systems, for designers, it's usually, we want to create everything new to say that we have complete ownership of something. But sometimes using systems or standard stuff is better. Sometimes we need to change the industry completely with something new. And so you have this pendulum, having new or something familiar. And so example of that, when Twitter was being designed, we had this pull to refresh. So if someone's on the timeline and they go beyond a certain point, you want to show, all right, you've reached all the tweets, press this button and reload. But this is too much UI. So over time, the engineer started having, when you go beyond a certain point, that's when you show the button. Then it was like, how about we just show text? And so there's like this natural onboarding experience to teach the behavior. Then you can remove all of the instruction completely. And so this became like an industry standard, to the point where the engineer was like, had people come up to him and say, I hate you so much because every other app doesn't have this and every other app feels broken. And so this becomes a new thing that you design. However, when you're designing something new, there is an expectation that there'll be a long onboarding process. So always have that in mind. But then when you have something familiar, before when you're installing a progressive web app on Android, you would have this screen that says add to home screen. Now users didn't know what this means, because the metaphor for install for them was like the App Store and the Play Store. So working with like W3C and Chrome, I designed this UI where you can get the developer to provide screenshots and a description, and then you show this app-like experience. And so when users saw that, installation rates for these apps went up exponentially, because you're meeting the user's mental model where they are, because they will make assumptions. And so if you can rely on something familiar, it works better for you. And let's talk about some navigation. And so when you're designing any navigation, buttons should always look inviting. Contrast should be clear. UX Motion did a study where they found these much clunkier, obvious buttons work better than these text ones. Now, one of the challenges that designers have is when we create things, it's in an elegant design tool. We end up designing posters rather than thinking about interactions. And so stuff like this looks nice and elegant, but it's not clearly obvious to users. So being obvious is the key. The function should always be precise, what we're trying to get people to do. So this is a fun one. There was a Japanese user on Twitter who asked this question about the save icon. And they said, why is the save icon a vending machine? Because they've never seen a floppy disk before. And so this is the challenge with using iconography as the only thing that indicates an interaction, is because if people don't know where their metaphor comes from, they'll start interpreting the shape as something else. And so like when I was creating like these talks, my daughter, she saw the search icon and she said, you know, Baba, you're a detective. Because I'm from the UK, most kids in the UK are indoctrinated with Sherlock Holmes, the hat and the magnifying glass, because you're searching for clues. And so when they see that, it's, oh, you must be a detective. But then when this icon was shown in rural India, they asked, why is the search icon a ping pong paddle? Because culture does have like ties to interpretation. So you should always try to use a label, again, making it obvious. And so Microsoft Outlook, what they found is, with the exception of expert users, most people would only understand the delete icon. The others they didn't really understand. And when they added labels, engagement went up exponentially. And so always use a label, always be obvious. Like hiding things, there's no good. Like you have hidden UX. Like on iOS, you're trying to select a piece of text. It's really, really frustrating. But what you're supposed to do is hold down the space bar and the whole thing becomes a trackpad. Now most people start taking their phones out because they don't believe me at this point. But it's like hiding the UX is weird for something that's really frustrating. I see someone doing that right now. And likewise, multiple select is a thing you can do in iOS. But most people don't know this. It's like, how many times have you grabbed dragging things like, this is so frustrating? Why wasn't onboarding there? Now there's a fine line between doing stuff which I call delightfully hidden. So you can customize the icon, after the iPhone 8 onwards, you can customize the logo to do something called the back tap. But that's cool, like, because it's not a critical path in the experience, doing these small things, like, it becomes delightful and an old device feels new again. And so having hidden things is okay for your power users because you're like, you know, appealing to them. But if this is really critical to your experience, hiding stuff is really risky. Now, visual feedback is, again, important. And so the life of a button. Someone taps a button, they get they engaging with it, they get enraged with it because nothing is happening, and then they tap it again because maybe it didn't work the first time. And so many systems, it will reload everything from scratch. That's why feedback is really critical. And so material design, they have the ripple, or these like animations, say, hey, look, we've taken your action, something is happening. Now this is a stylistic choice. The key thing here is feedback has happened. But the designer of the iPhone keypad, he took the transition between pressing key and the actual key down every single notch to the point where there was no transition. When you press it, it just stays there. Again, the key thing is not about let's add more motion and animation, it's the feedback that you're indicating to the user, the system has taken your action and it's going to do something. That's the main thing. So stylistically, you can do whatever you want, so long as you indicate feedback. Now, let's talk about loading and progress bars. What's interesting is all these progress bars are loading to the same speed, but the one that ripples to the left faster feels faster by like 11% when you ask people. People are weird. Why is that? It's because something that pulsates feels like it's coming along quicker, even though it's not. We find that when you stagger animation and speed up, it feels much faster as well. And if you remember like this hand sanitizer and the mirror in the elevator, doing what I call delightful details, this animation could distract a user while you wait for the system or site to load. Another thing is, no amount of time is perceived the same. And so the purest way to design a loading bar is you load 60%, you show 60%. But people are really patient here, and they get less impatient as you go along. And so the better way to do it would be when you've loaded 80%, show 50%, because then it gets really quick towards the end, when that's not actually how much is actually loaded. Now, some people say this is wrong and unethical, but people's state of mind don't allow for that. And so you have to use these hacking techniques. And so the doctor of design, Stephen Tsao, he's written a book called Engineering Time, where he has all these techniques. It's from Microsoft. It's like the logic is not every 10% or 10 minutes of block is perceived the same. So why would you represent it the same? You know, the goal is to indicate to the user that something is coming along. And so YouTube it animates this loading bar and it hangs towards the end. That's actually fake. It just does that to make you think something's coming, but that's not actually what's happening. And so the best practice of loading is like having a blank screen is really bad. Right, you know, because people don't know when something is coming along or when it will actually be there. The next thing along is the spinner. Now, it's better than a blank screen, but the challenge here is people have negative connotations because of Microsoft's sundial or the beach ball on Mac OS, and it doesn't tell you when something is coming along. Skeleton screens are really popular, but the problem with skeleton screens, when people see grey boxes, they think it's broken. And so that's why Google Photos, they'll have colour boxes, which they'll swap out when the image is like ready to load. What we find is the best thing to do is the moment you have content, you show it. You use metadata where you can. So it's like you have the word author or date or whatever, just because it gives an indication of what type of content is coming. You will progressively load things, maybe as a low pixelated image, and replace it with a high pixel weighted one. And you might show the system fonts and then replace them with like your custom fonts. So again, you want to make sure that you show something rather than nothing. Oops. Oops. I closed my screen by accident. Whoops. There we go. We're back. I pressed the wrong button. The affordance was wrong or something. And so the goal here is like we're masking transitions. We don't want to indicate process because people don't know how long. We want to show progress. So you can see like from a technical standpoint, doing this would be very hard to do. But you want to indicate, like conceptually again, you want to show that something is coming rather than nothing, so that the user is reassured that the system or site is loading. But again, like you treat, like every context that you design for is going to be different. So with YouTube, the most heaviest thing on the page is the video. And so from an engineering standpoint, you think, load that last, but this is the most important thing in the experience. The thumbnails and description people don't come to read or look at, it's the video. And so you have to think about contextually to the systems that you're designing. It's not just, all right, let's do all these things because Mustafa said so. No, no, no. You have to think about it. Because you have to understand your users and adapt. Because like, these are your users. This is your perfect design. And these are your users. And so whatever you build, however you build it, this is why you need to put it in front of people all the time. Because you will often be surprised at how someone interprets something. And so, in summary, you have to always reframe the problem, think about user perception, right? Always think about what are people trying to accomplish. You want to make sure that you keep your navigation clear and simple. You know, be really obvious. There's no shame in being obvious. Like, make motion really intentional and avoid blank screens as much as possible. And always park the plane further away from the terminal. And with that, firstly, I want to say thank you to the organizers of SINFO. You guys have been amazing. It's like for students to produce such an organized conference, like, is pretty amazing. So thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you for listening, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. Let me just pass by here. So now is the time for any questions that you might have for Mustafa. I will go around and give you the microphone. Around the back, or any questions?
No questions about big tech, about jobs, about performance, about anything?
Nobody interested in design here.
You all hate designers? Why are designers so horrible? That's a good question. Why are you so funny? That's a good question, actually. Say, no, please, let's have a conversation. You can start throwing tomatoes at me as well.
Because always the times the clients don't know what they want for their front end.
I can just about hear, sorry.
Because because always the times the clients don't know what they want for their image and layouts and usabilities, and
I think
they only search from the concurrencies to search from several ideas.
Yeah,
put in there.
Having multiple ideas is cool. For me, it's always like having a very strong research focus is really, really important. I think this is why observing users is always important. Because sometimes like the most visual thing is not the most important thing, it's understanding what, you know. As a client, they say they don't know what they want, but our job as makers is to figure out what they want with them, rather than say, here's your thing, now go away. And so, yeah, but that's part of the process. I mean, it would be nice to sit in our rooms and just make stuff, but part of being a designer is understanding how people interact with things. So, Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I'm good, but maybe. Any other questions?
Thank you for that. Any other question? Yeah, okay.
Hi, I have a question. How is it like working at big companies that have been...
It's so horrible now.
No, but that have products for so long, for example, Twitter and Meta. How do you maintain the product from a user standpoint? How do you maintain it innovative and so that people come back?
I think it depends on, like, 'cause these big companies usually have, like, you have Facebook, right, or Twitter. And then within that, you have all these multiple teams who are responsible for different features. And so it kind of depends on the team. Like, the best ones have strong research, I find. Like, when we were at Twitter, even small things like we were redesigning the drafting, just having a strong research culture where we'll do design sprints, workshops, usability testing, interviews. That I find was like the thing that pushes innovation the most. Constantly testing and understanding and putting things in front of people and learning new things. I think that's the most important thing. And even as an engineer, you don't necessarily need a designer there to test. You can put a prototype, understand how people react, and then like a good testing thing is, say you're designing a flow. You ask your user a question, try to do X activity, and then you watch them. And you try to get them to do it again. And then you say, okay, you maybe record them, and then you say, okay, what made sense to you? What didn't? Note if they had problems with it. And at the end you say, okay, if you had a magic wand, what would you change? Because you're trying to tease out like what was easy, what was difficult. And then you start understanding what is the job they're trying to accomplish. I think that's where innovation comes from, observation of people. And that can take a long time. In terms of working at big companies, it can be really appealing because of the big names. It's just sometimes we present the perfect process, but it never works like that, you know? There's always politics and all this other stuff. And then in recent years, you've seen like the layoffs, which have been quite scary because the tech job was seen as the perfect job. We have someone from Tor who's going to tell you that there are other places other than big tech. He's going to talk to you later. There you go. Shout out to you, Tor. And so it's not the only place to work at. But given the opportunity, I would always advise, like, try it because it's so different. You have opportunity to have access to so many users, but it's not the only place. And it's not the only thing out there.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
I work as a travel consultant right now, and I'm developing a site without knowing any engineering, so probably using Shopify.
Yeah.
But I think it's people are starting to get the drop shipping typical site. How can I distance myself from that, but still get a good conversion? If you have any tips on that topic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose the question is for you as a business owner is what do you want to do? You want to sell products, right? And so when I was at Google, I worked on developer relations. And I was basically creating content like this for people, for designers and developers. And the philosophy they had is go to where your customers are, go to where the users are, go to where the developers are. And so when anyone's making a shopping site, there's this old school of build it and they'll come. But if no one knows your site, why would they come? And so I would always advise anyone, where are the users? They're on Amazon, they're on eBay, they're on, you know, whatever local, Vinted or whatever is. Go there first, start promoting your brand within there, and then slowly you can switch to your own site or system. I think it's very risky to do something and then wait, because brand recognition is a big thing and you're competing with loads of people. So go to where the customers are is what I would say. Have your own thing on the side and then build up. Like, so I have friends who use Instagram quite heavily and they promote their stuff on there. So that's another funnel. And then use a lot of analytics to see where your most popular funnel is, because it could be very different. It could be social media, it could be email marketing, it could be whatever. I would say first though, go to where your customers are, and then Facebook is a good one to use. Social media is like, you have a big funnel, but it won't necessarily get you a lot of conversion. So you have to think, where is the best place and best time to actually spend? But you can only do that contextually by first starting reaching customers. That's what I would say. I wouldn't try and just build this amazing site, spend all this money, investment and time, and no one comes because they don't know, right? So that's what I would say.
Yes, I've started with social media and physical events. I'm going to one in next week, but I thought I should have a landing page for them.
Yeah, of course. I think having a place is always good as a starting point. But think of how you can like reach as many people as possible. I think that's the goal, the thing I would advise.
Thank you.
No worries. I think there was one other question over here.
So we don't have any more time for questions inside of the room, but if you want to talk to Mustafa, we will direct him outside here to the showcase area, and you'll be able to talk to him one-to-one, which may be great as well, because we're all engineers, so we like talking to the person directly, right?
Okay, thank you so much.
So now for the giveaway. If you haven't heard yet, it's a ticket for Rock in Rio. I'll just set down my phone just to take a little picture. I understood that it wasn't me that was funny. Now is the time where I awkwardly stare at you while it turns on. So now you can see all of your faces, hopefully, and not croquettes, which I've seen. So Rodrigo Manel Pita Camacho, something like this. Congratulations, and thank you very much, Mustafa.